All right, here we are for another session of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee here, and of course, we have another phenomenal guest joining us today, Kike Ojo-Thompson from our northern neighbor, and we're so glad that you're here. And really, what we're trying to do with this Coffee with the Founder is introduce our WPC family to the people who've been a part and been supporting and been attending and presenting in a way that is just getting to know them better in the work that they're doing long after they leave the stage or the workshop facilitation. So we're glad that you're here. And I wanted to start by asking you, Kike, if I met you at a grocery store or a train stop, bus stop, and I say, ask you, hey, my name is Eddie, what's your name? Who are you? What do you do? What's your work about? How would you respond to that question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. So my name is Kike Ojo-Thompson. I am an equity consultant and practitioner. I help organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit public sector, achieve equitable outcomes for their employees and for the people that they serve, so clients or service users, etc. Spaces that are talking about diversity and inclusion, anti-oppression, if they're more critical, anti-racism, spaces like that, and helping them, and or not talking about it yet. Let me flag that. They may not be talking about it yet, but they might sort of flag an issue. I come in and support them with understanding, strategy development, so professional development, support in the form of coaching, strategic advising, and those sorts of things, so that in the end, they see equitable outcomes for everyone. It so happens that a lot of the work these days is around, there's a lot of work around Black folks, so anti-Black racism is sort of something that's sort of surfacing more and more in terms of people's awareness of the issue and their inability to manage it well. Certainly, that's true here in the Toronto area, across Canada, and it's also the other key issue is about how Indigenous folks are faring. So what we call Indigenous, I think you all often refer to as, say, Native American. I'm talking about that group. So, of course, obviously all the intersections of our identities, but that's where we're seeing sort of a lot of work in sort of both sides, both public and private sector.
Yeah. So can you just talk a little bit about there in the GTA, as it's referred to there, possibly even across Canada as a whole, what does the power structure look like when you're going into these organizations, for-profit, non-profit? What are we looking at in reference to the people in power, the people working? Give us a sense of what is going on in the workplace, in the school places there in Canada, from the people in charge and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, let me sort of flesh out a bit about my journey that will kind of speak to the spaces that I reflect upon when you ask that question. So, so while I'm a consultant and sort of a facilitator, a practitioner in equity, and I've been doing this for 21 years. For many of those years, I did that work alongside having careers on the inside of those sectors and spaces, right? And I think that's really important to note, because when you work inside the system and you're responsible for making this sort of change, is very different than working on that from the outside, excuse me. And so from the inside, particularly as someone who has held senior leadership positions, you have a particular understanding of the complexities, the nuances, and the constraints that often show up that you still have to navigate through to get the work done, nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So, and so what am I navigating through? So in my case, as a Black woman in senior leadership, in the public sector, I was navigating it, and let me say, the Canadian context. I want to note the Canadian context and tell you what I think some of the specific similarities and differences are in terms of the U.S. Let me flag too that I did live and work in Atlanta, Georgia for almost 3 years at the city of Atlanta. I led the creation of an environmental justice strategy there for the city. So this is going back like another lifetime ago, about 15 years ago now. So what I'm saying is that as a Black woman, what I was navigating is a lot of the unspoken rules, right? And so the power structure is operating. And so the first thing is that it's unspoken. So it's unnamed. You are playing a game. The game board is out. You're on it. You're a part of the game board, right? You're a piece of the puzzle. But oftentimes what I notice is that people that are in the positions they're experiencing the oppression and they can tell you so. But what I've noticed is that they can't tell you how it's operating. So there's generally speaking, there's a lack of understanding of how oppression is operating in showing, like, not that it is, but how it is. And so there's sort of this, you're allowed to gather, so employee resource groups, you're allowed to empower, yay Black History Month, for example. I'm just using these things as an example. But what hasn't happened is sort of a collective turn of gaze onto the organization, the structure, the power structure, the institution. And the reason that hasn't happened is the presumption that our systems and our institutions are neutral. And when we say that, we mean that they don't have a particular identity, they don't favor anyone. Why would you say that? It's just a school, it's just child welfare, it's just, the bank, it's just a bank, and sort of part of that it's just narrative is also saying that it doesn't have an identity, it doesn't benefit or favor or privilege anyone in particular. And that lack of understanding has enabled the picture that we see today, which is, the trend of, straight white men in power, and sort of everyone else sort of working their way to the top, and sort of the infrequency of seeing other identities in significant, influential, and powerful leadership positions. So the narrative that's fighting that progress, so the process of working towards that is you have to name, this is how it's operating, that there's something systemic going on. But when the dominant narrative is, no, we live in a neutral society, what matters is your merit. It's a neoliberal context that says we start in the same place, and if you just work hard enough, you too can have, et cetera, et cetera. And so that lack of naming is rooted in those ideas, meritocracy, neoliberalism, the presumption of neutrality. But the thing that disrupts that is quite logical, actually, so it's very interesting that this gets ignored, is that our outcomes speak. Our outcomes speak to something systemic going on. Our outcomes suggest that, in fact, our systems are not neutral. Our institutions are not neutral. The problem is that when we do, so for example, and we're going to talk about COVID, but right now, the US, there's all kinds of buzz about the overrepresentation of African Americans in hospitalizations and deaths with regards to COVID. The subtext, because the sentence stops there, I shouldn't call it a subtext, the narrative that gets attached inappropriately is that it's happening because we are irresponsible, we are unhealthy, we have horrible practices, we don't care, we don't listen, as Black folks. And, and an ignoring of how systemic oppression is operating to create the comorbidities and maintain it, and then boom, you have this outcome. So in my work and in my experience, that lack of awareness that the systems are not neutral has actually harmed us the most. And it begs the big question, well, if they're not neutral, then what are they? Like, if the system isn't neutral, what are we suggesting? And the part of the crux, a major piece of my work is helping people understand that the fact that our systems are not neutral is because they are actually a reflection of our global legacies. The legacies of patriarchy, of slavery, of colonialism, of capitalism, of religious crusades, and of the theft and conquest of the Americas in relation to our indigenous people, right? That the values and the beneficiaries of those processes, slavery, capitalism, et cetera, the beneficiaries of those continue to see benefits today, and the reproduction of ideas about groups that were set up in those legacies, in those moments, in those processes, are maintained today through our institutions. So you go to school, you learn to fear certain groups, you learn who is lazy, you learn who is industrious, you learn who is capable, you go to the hospital, you're treated a certain way, you go to the lawyer's office, et cetera, et cetera. So our institutions reproduce what the legacies sort of set up. So we don't have to be in slavery to be experiencing the sort of the takeaways from slavery. They get reproduced in our institutions. So that is invisible. So that narrative is not discussed, it's invisibilized, and we are simply functioning. So yeah, so I mean, it's a long answer to your question, but I think that's what I see, that's what I'm helping to disrupt. And probably, if I may, what I want to add is just the thing that's really worrying me lately is, so when I come into organizations, something that is important is how marginalized groups fight for their own liberation, right? Work toward their own liberation. And I'm watching sector for sector as the spaces like the employee resource groups, whether it be for women, for racialized people, for people who are LGBTQ, et cetera, right? How those spaces, how those groups have rifts that could almost be divided along age lines. I'm not sure if to call it conservatism versus liberal, I'm not sure, but we've got the group that is very concerned about making real moves, shouldn't call them real, that's very judgmental, towards making system-based moves. And then you have the camp that's in, and so they're interested simply in so if it's in education, let's help the children be resilient. They want to do resilience all day. They don't want to disrupt system. They're worried that disruption of system will have a bad, will give them a bad reputation. And they're fighting internally the other half who want to address system, who get problematized by said systems. So then the other group is like, see, right? And that other group that's looking to be more conservative is often supported by the institution. So they feel a sense of, not even entitlement, but appropriateness, like we are the right way to handle this. And so it begs the question, should the oppressor, the oppressive space have control over what the liberation work looks like? Right. So these are some of the, the things that are going on over here.
I mean, it's ironic that you possibly are speaking about the Canadian experience. However, I got a feeling if we play this and we don't tell people where you're living, it sounds really familiar.
To that, Dr. Moore, I do work in the US. I do want to flag that my company is called Kojo Institute. If people can find me at kojoinstitute.com. And I do support I do have US clients and people that I care about there who I work with. Yeah. Yeah,
that's good to know. A truly global operation.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, what I want to ask you about is the consequences of naming it. Mm-hmm. To really go at the toughest issues when you're doing the work. What are the consequences, the toll it takes on those of us who do the work at that level?
Yeah.
And the self-care involved.
Yeah.
But I want to be even more specific and ask you, is it different for a Black woman? Or if you're speaking to, future consultants or consultants out there who are Black women, can you just talk a little bit about how there could be some even differences as it relates to your specific identity?
Oh my goodness, so powerful. I just got goosebumps. And I think the goosebumps come because, the experience doesn't just stop in the work context. You end up wearing it in your whole life, right? You get taken up a particular way. So one of the things, if I'm to talk about it as a Black woman, and particularly around the impact as a Black woman, is, it reminds me of the "ain't I a woman," the Sojourner Truth statement, "ain't I a woman," and it's been repeated by many. That defeminizing, if I may call it that, of the fighter. I remember I was on a panel a couple months ago, about 3 months ago, and an elder Black man, but older than me, whose position was quite conservative and in that way problematic, and I was speaking to that. We got off the stage and he said, "Well, you're quite the warrior." And I'm feisty, as they say. I said, "That's warrior princess. I've been named a warrior princess by some of my elders," because I had to. In the moment, it was like he was defeminizing me for being articulate, clear, strong, persistent. I don't know that people talk about women in relation to being warriors often. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a warrior. I hope I'm being heard well. It's just that he made me into this street fighter, right? And I had to sort of say, I'm a warrior princess, actually. So there's that piece, and I think we would have to get into like Black feminist thought and sort of theories around femininity, white femininity, and things like that, to understand that the very first thing we have to negotiate as Black women is being able to fight for our liberation, and still be considered woman, however you might be identifying as a woman, but, whether it be all the way to desire, which is what I meant by it kind of finds itself outside of the work context. So there's that impact and cost, and sort of being taken up as, like I said, problematic fighter, edgy, aggressive, never assertive, but aggressive, and things like that. In the work context, it's similar attributes that are applied to you, or that you're labeled with, but they're taken up in the worst way possible. So you are scary, you are threatening. Everything you do and say is taken up with that presumption that you are you got your guns out kind of thing, that someone else can say the exact same thing. In my experience of senior leadership in an institution, I had a white woman who worked for me who was fierce. She's fierce as heck. And she was, she stood up in a meeting and was like, "It's white supremacy," she said, right? And I remember the stress sweat that came over me. And part of the reason the stress sweat came over me, it didn't make sense logically at the time. But when I checked in with her after, I go, I'm about to take a hit for the fact that you just said that. And so said, so done, right? So anything and everything becomes your problem. I mean, you're doing, you will be responsible in a negative way for it. On the flip, when things go very well, it's not so much that kudos are handed to you, but the organization did well. And I have personally lived that as well. I think, there's a different kind of fear that is attached to us that do this work. Before we're seen as a resource and a friend, we're seen as the enemy and the sort of the enemy, stay away from, stay clear from. And in my experience, I've had to prove myself over a year, of consistent, integrity-filled, authentic, effective service, and holding people gently as I move them through their learning. All of that had to happen before I got to come over to the other side and be seen as, remotely safe. They still got their watchers out, but they were more likely to sort of engage in a different posture. So it's a journey when you do it like this. and trauma is real. Sorry if I may, I see that you want to speak. I do coaching for CEOs, executive directors, and leads, people who lead equity or diversity work or whatever you call it in your space. And I was talking to an executive director about her diversity lead, and I said, I know that you have only certain structures available for compensation. I want you to think about what else you can do for this person, because the trauma, so how do you make room for them to have time and space to process the trauma as they lead this whole organization through this work?
So is this what you dreamed of as 8 years old, 10 years old? I mean, how did this happen? You become the speaker, the trainer, the global consultant that you are. Is this what you dreamed of growing up?
I feel, I don't know if there's a lot of people out there like me. I hope so, but I really did. I really did. My parents were divorced. And so when I would go to my dad's house with my dad and my stepmom, do you all remember Eyes on the Prize, the video series? It's like, you know, old time. You have to be a little bit older than whatever to know that. So the Eyes on the Prize series, in my dad's home in Toronto, in the Toronto area, I used to sit for hours alone and watch that series over and over and over again. I have always been obsessed with these issues, and I have been active. And one of the things I have shared with folks is, I know this is what I'm supposed to do, because whoever you call, so God, the universe, I was rewarded throughout my life for taking what other people define as risks. So, the work I've been doing, I've been awarded many times from valedictorian in, what would that be, junior high onward. I have always been rewarded for being exactly this person. I get that for other people, there might have been other, and don't get me wrong, there have also been personal and political and career costs or battles, as a result. But the rewards have always felt like more to me, and have always caused me to continue to lean in. So yeah, literally since I was that little, at least 8, if not, or at most 8, if not younger.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. So talk a little bit about COVID-19. What's going on there in the Toronto area where you are? I mean, first, how are you doing? The family doing? I don't even know what day we're on. I think we're on 30-something days. I lost count, but I do know that I don't know how I'm doing. I'm saying to people, I'm trying to stay positive. I'm trying to stay productive, but I really don't think there's anything that allows us to get a sense of how we're doing. And so I've been reflecting on that, trying to reflect on that. But in general, I'm just wondering, how are you handling things? How are you doing there, the family doing there in the household, but also what's happening around in the community? What's your sense of how folks are doing?
Thank you so much. How am I? I've been calling it sort of, I don't even know what words to put, but I will try. So for me, if someone told me it would all be over on this day, I don't even know that I care so much what day it is. Just give me one. That would go a long way for me. I don't know if other people are like that out there, but I really could use a date. You live in a cold climate area in where you live. So, I mean, Toronto is not the coldest part of Canada. It's the southern tip, but we really live for our summers. Like, we really live for them. And the idea that we might be in quarantine, or I guess we're social distancing and, are being asked to stay home through that summer is devastating, to say the least. So day for day, I'm fine because I'm busy. My husband and I are blessed to be able to work from home. I mean, he's careered and I run my business, and he works for an institution. But So, we're okay in that way financially. That wasn't certain at first, though, particularly for my business. I've had to shift so much, like you, really quickly wrap my head around the cancellations that were just happening, for all the things that were about people gathering were just being canceled like rain. And I had, so just kind of keep my head up around that and sort of come up with a new plan for so many of those and wrap my head around how to do almost everything virtually. I have to be honest with you, the kind of work that I do, and I was saying this to some people who do similar work, so much of it is intuitive, so much of it is energy. And I literally read it like, the actual particles in the room. I feel them and I read them. So I've yet to see exactly how that's going to play out and what will be different about the effectiveness of my practice. It's being able to see the person in the back of the room who's leaned back, maybe they have a scowl or whatever is happening, right? When you can't see that, you can't address it, no matter how good. So concerned about that. But I think what's also interesting is, a lot of spaces are like, we need you more now than ever, because we get that in this emergency response posture that we're in, we are more likely to miss our blind spots, to default into ugly places and ugly processes. So please stay with us. So I'm also seeing that happening. So I'm doing a ton more coaching. Of a lot of leadership coaching is really huge right now. Strategic support and advising to leadership teams, and working towards trying to make myself available to, sort of the larger parts of organizations in this new normal. Toronto, here's the thing about Canada, and I know you have other Canadian family members of the White Privilege Conference, so I presume they'll tell you similarly. We don't have a mandatory data collection posture in this country. It is staggering. It's a profound problem. It is the opposite of equity work. This whole stance and the sort of posture against it, and Canada has normalized the narrative that says that doing that work is racist, doing that work is oppressive. So we're still there. I mean, we're seeing it now. There are all kinds of requests for disaggregated data, particularly around race for COVID, particularly when our neighbor to the south, our cousins, we are attached to you, right, are seeing such staggering outcomes for various communities. We know that our outcomes are similar. And we know that they will be on COVID because they are similar, if not worse, in child welfare. And I'm talking about proportion. Similar, if not worse, in our prison context, etc. Like our numbers, we are less. So if I talk about Black folks for a second, we are less than you all numerically and proportionately, to the countries. So we're only 3% of the country, 4% of the province of Ontario, between about 8 or 9% in the Greater Toronto area, depending on where you are. But we see staggering numbers in child welfare and education, etc. So it stands to reason that those same staggering numbers would be the case in COVID. And the age-old Canadian response is, we're concerned about everybody. All lives matter. So that's really what's happening. So many of the people who work in front lines are racialized. They may not, not all Black, but like the nurses, the personal support workers, the people that, drive the city buses. I call it a fraternity, like the Greek fraternity, because it's like quite Black, our city bus and transit system. And they're not protected properly. We've got PPE concerns. It's a lot of similar stuff to what you all are experiencing, but there's not a global media narrative that, it's like we don't exist here. This is really the best way I can put it. We are invisibilized in this country, and it's gonna have detrimental effects.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing here in America, and there's this phraseology that people are saying that whenever America gets a cold, Black people get the flu or something like that, right? What you're saying is whenever Canada gets the cold, y'all don't know what happens to people of color because
We
you
know,
never checked in. But
right?
you know, but there's no kind of statistical evidence, so to speak.
That's right. Exactly.
So there could be real devastation happening beyond the flu even.
Yes,
There's no real record that shows.
that's it.
So what I wanted to ask you about as we get close to the end is what's next for you as you look at the next 10 years?
Mm.
What's on the agenda for you as you think about, 20 plus years of doing this work? What do you think about over the next 10 years? What do you got cooking? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I am like many people trying to figure out how to provide my support more online, right? So that's one, and how to make that more globally accessible without me having to be present. So how much, how can I increase what can be done without me in real time? And so that's one level, without me in real time, with me virtually, and then with me in person. So that's kind of how I would sort of break that down. More of the same. I mean, growing as my team, growing up my team so that I've got sort of more people to depend on and sort of to take things on. Certainly we'll see resources come from Kojo Institute and from me personally, books, etc. And, we've been given the gift of time. And I have to say I'm really, really busy, so it's kind of not true. But but the sort of narrative in the air is, oh, you've got time now, so I'm trying to find it so I can respond to my publisher, etc. So, but yeah, so some things are cooking. I'm one of those people that I don't talk a lot about what's coming until it's here. But I am here. www.kojoinstitute.com, and we have a full suite of service that can be done virtually, and I'm really busy doing that with clients, and really happy, like thoroughly and truly happy and excited about it. And I hope to get back to a white privilege conference, like, watching to see what you're going to do, if you're going to do something online, or when we get to be together again. I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, can't wait to fly. Can't wait to go to the Caribbean onto a beach and things like that. That's what I'm thinking about right now. So.
Self-care is real, that's for sure. I'm wondering if you have some advice for future entrepreneurs, consultants, particularly folks of color, and more specifically, young Black girls. We're doing this new project, teaching beautiful, brilliant Black girls. And thank you for participating. But I'm just wondering, what's your message to young Black girls as we look at the next 25 years and some of the kind of challenges that they're going to be facing, some of what you've learned from your life's journey? What would you say if some young Black girl is listening in today, just as some words of inspiration from your life's journey to where you are and to the possibilities ahead?
Amazing. Well, first of all, you will look back one day and realize that the journey was all purposeful. I was a high school teacher at one point. I was trying to understand why that happened. It was very short, and I left to move to the States and do some other work, but I could have stayed and made a full career of education. And I often wonder, why did I do that? Well, I used to wonder. Now I know, it's the education sector. I'm just using this as an example. I always say they're a sector of folks who really prefer to listen to folks who were in education. So, if you want to consult with them, they're like, well, have you been in a classroom? And it's fair. It's a fair question. And so just an example of my life's journey and how it has proven to be, all of it has sort of supported and how do I say, have been resources to what I need today. None of it is a waste. And even painful parts are not a waste. And I think when we shift our thinking about the painful parts around what our soul needed to learn, when I look at painful experiences around my soul's growth and how those things sort of provided that, it really helps me to move past those things. I would say, I was telling someone who does diversity work in an organization yesterday, I said, when I was leading equity work, diversity work inside of an organization, there was not a morning I left that I did not first do a spiritual practice. And I made sure to note to her, I'm not necessarily talking religious. Although if you have a religious practice, that's cool. But if you don't, some kind of spiritual practice that where I covered myself before I walked out and took on what I had to take on every day. The third thing I would say is, there's a lot of pressure and noise these days, and I'm so grateful I didn't grow up in that noise. But it's like everybody's supposed to be an entrepreneur right now. Get your business on, So it's kind of like, everybody's an entrepreneur, and I think there's something to be said for growing your skills inside of institutions, like sharpening your teeth, trying things, taking advantage of all the learning you can do, take on leadership, and whatever it is you're trying. So in my case with equity work, do that equity work, lead that equity work inside of those institutions, because you will learn the invaluable gems that make the difference between equity practitioners and consultants that, they really just sort of have they're almost robotic, versus the ones that really know what the sweet spots are. I think so don't feel bad, ashamed, less than, whatever, for working inside of an institution right now. Work that thing and follow and push on your dreams every day. Do more for yourself, do something for yourself and what you're working on. But there's something very valuable about working in institutions, at least for a while. So I would leave them with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's some good stuff. Gladwell wrote this book, Outliers. The way I talk about it to young people is, and he talks about 10,000 hours is really what you need in your craft to really reach that level of professionalism. And I'm so happy that I was, like you were saying, working in an institution, organization, honing my skills, getting to know, so on and so forth, reading, socializing, interacting, and it's paid dividends in the long run. And like you, which I just really want to celebrate and appreciate you for signing the front of the check, not the back of the check. Because I tell young people, I don't think it's okay to have that as one of your life's goals. But I do think in this field, it's really helpful to kind of come through that institutional experience. There's so many YouTube phenomena that are going on out there, and I think folks just think they can skip right over and hit the main stage.
That's what I'm saying. It's dangerous. We laugh about it, but it's actually dangerous. You're accountable for what you tell folks and how you steward an organization. It's no small thing. So yeah.
Well, we want to end in a fun way, and we're collecting from people. What is it that you're watching?
Goody. I can't wait to tell you.
So is there something that you're watching that you've learned from? And is there something that you're watching that just kind of, what's your take you away kind of show? So you got some goodies in our bag. What do you got over there?
Well, you added the pressure when you said learn from, because I have to tell you, when I get done with these days of creating and thinking and talking, I reach for things that actually allow my brain to kind of relax. But I'm late on this, but I'm really loving Ozark. Really loving Ozark. And what a perfect series to depict how white privilege works. Wow. So really, really getting into that, another one that does the same thing, but there's actually Black people in it, is Little Fires Everywhere. So it's new, and so it's just, you gotta, those people that like to binge, you can't binge it yet, but it's Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon, And Reese Witherspoon, I have to give her kudos because she uses her own identity to slip in and disrupt and deconstruct how privilege is operating. So those are my two kind of big ones right now. I do have some other stuff that I won't talk about that I get into. That's what, even more sort of mind free, we'll call it. But we all need balance, right? We need a little bit of everything.
Yes, yes. Well, we appreciate that. And we appreciate you. And you're always welcome at the White Privilege Conference. And we do look forward to seeing you face to face, but it's good to at least see you through the virtual platform. And thank you for coming on to share with us a little bit about you and the work you're doing. And we look forward to staying in touch and collaborating. As long as you'll collaborate, we'll collaborate with you.
I'm here. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore, for creating this opportunity. It is not lost on me. And thank you to everyone who listened. So.
All right. Take care. Peace.
Bye.
Peace.